We want to thank everybody for coming today. And I'm Jackie Backrack. I'm the Executive Director of the South Bay Cities Council of Governments. We've got council members here from all throughout the South Bay. And just to acclimate you, District Attorney Gascón, the South Bay Cities Council of Governments are the cities between the port and the airport. So we go from El Segundo and Inglewood down to the Palos Verdes Peninsula, and from Carson, Hawthorne, and Gardena to the ocean. And we're all ethnicities, all incomes, all geographies. We're just a very, very diverse subregion. And on the call, on the Zoom today, we have mostly council members, but some city staff and some city managers. We are very, very interested and do work on homeless issues, transportation issues, working on fiber optics and ways of communicating. So we have a broad range of different topic areas that our Council of Governments works on. And I'm going to turn it over to our first vice chair and Rancho Palos Verdes council member, John Cruikshank, who will be the sort of our moderator or master of ceremonies tonight. So John?
Yeah, thank you very much, Jackie, and welcome, District Attorney Gascón. Thank you for being here tonight, you and your staff. So as Jackie mentioned, I'm first vice chair of the South Bay City Council of Government. I'm also a city council member in the city of Rancho Palos Verdes. And of course, safety and crime are something that actually puts us all together. We all have the same interests in mind in regards to that. So for those of you on the call, thank you for joining. What we have planned for you this afternoon is that our district attorney will have an opportunity to, of course, introduce himself, but also to talk for 15 to 20 minutes. Also, I believe one of his staff members are going to be presenting in the chat while he's talking their one-year report. And also, finally, a number of questions came in from many of you. Those were compiled and sent through the COG's staff and sent to the district attorney, I believe, a little earlier. Hopefully he received those. And if he would like to address any of those during his talk, that'd be great. And then, of course, once we get through those questions, some of those pre-sent questions, then we'll open it up for the entire audience to ask their questions. What we would request is that you put those questions in the chat. And then when those questions are in the chat, Jackie will call upon you, and you can either have her read them, or of course, we would prefer you to go ahead and be on camera and ask your questions personally. Having been involved with many of these type of events, and we're all zoomed out, I know, for the last 2 years, sometimes people maybe aren't so inclined to ask questions, but I think the one thing that's really important about government and us as elected officials is that we have an open dialogue with constituents and our residents, our friends and neighbors. And so please don't be shy about questions. And so with that, we very much appreciate our district attorney, George Gascón, being with us tonight, and I will let him have the floor. And you're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, and I apologize. I'm not sure why my computer was not working, so I'm doing this from the phone. But first of all, thank you so much, John, and thank you for the opportunity to address all of you, and Jackie for working so hard to make this put this together. Look, you know, I have been in office now for a year, but I have been in this business for over 40 years. I started as a patrol officer in the LAPD. I went through the ranks to run operations for the LAPD as an assistant chief. I was a chief of police in 2 major cities, Mesa, Arizona, and San Francisco, and then I became a district attorney much later. My entire life, including the time that I spent in the U.S. Army, has been about public service. I go to sleep at night and I get up in the morning thinking about how to make communities safer, and that has been a lifelong dedication. I understand the fears, and you know, because I live in the same community as you all do, you know, I worry about the same things. You know, I understand, especially in the last 2 years with COVID running rampant, the impact that the displacement has had in so many communities. We have seen homicides go up around the country, regardless of the political tendencies of a particular region, and some areas more than others. We're probably somewhere in the middle of the pack. We have seen, even in 2022 now, we have seen another increase in homicides in many parts of the country. Thankfully, at least the city of LA is reporting a reduction in the first quarter. But the reality is that there are many forces that are going on that are impacting the way that we do our work. I think some of them have been the result of years of past policies, and I think some of it is the result of the current conditions. When I took over, I came in with a very clear agenda of taking the criminal legal system into a different direction, a direction that I believe, based on data, based on science, based on the experiences of other parts of the world, would create a more sustainable public safety model. We have continued to prosecute felonies at very much the same rates that were before I came into office. In fact, in many cases, such as sexual assaults and serious assaults against police officers, we actually increased our filing rates. When it came to misdemeanors, we took a more nuanced approach. We have continued to prosecute those misdemeanors that deal with violence and deal with domestic violence and other things. But when it came to those that are driven by mental health issues, by substance abuse, we have taken a more nuanced approach and really focusing on diversion, because we believe over a longer period of time, we will get better results. That has allowed us actually to put a shift in putting more resources into our felony prosecutions. We also have taken a look at traffic, and with the exception of DUIs, which we continue to prosecute at the same rate, we have diverted many, like people driving without a license. Those are infractions, and we believe that accountability for that is better handled as in a traffic court. We have, moved in that direction as well. At the same time, as we have continued to work on increasing our capacity to deal with violence, and by the way, working in really unprecedented times. Look, I mean, for my first year in office, I have visited every single branch in my office, and my visits typically would encounter an office that is half empty, or sometimes even more, because in protecting our people and, quite frankly, following the directions of the courts and the directions of our county, we have been working remotely more and more in order to address the impact of COVID throughout our community. But as soon as things started to open up, for instance, a little bit during the summer, we created our community violence reduction, and we started a pilot program with the LAPD that we're hoping to move around the county, where we're actually deploying prosecutors, investigators at police stations and working with the police, working with community groups. We have now created governance boards in each of those communities, public health and others, in order to address community violence. And we're already seeing some very good results in those areas that we're working. We have also created the Community Violence Intervention Team, where we have put together a team of 10 investigators from our office that have direct contact with our legal team. And we're going into communities, especially those that have smaller police departments, where perhaps they're experiencing violence, they don't have the resources the LAPD or the Sheriff Department does, and working with them in order to address the problems in those communities. Gun proliferation has been a tremendous problem for us, and especially ghost guns. We have seen, especially in the last 2 years, a tremendous rise in the number of ghost guns that are being used to commit crimes in the community. And for those of you who may not be familiar with ghost guns, these are basically guns that you buy a kit in the internet and you can put it together. In some cases, people can put them together, quite frankly, in 10, 15 minutes. And that has become one of the weapons of choice in many parts of the community. We have seen up to around November of last year, 26 homicides, I believe, in the city of LA alone, that we know of, where a ghost gun was used. And there was approximately just under 2,000 ghost guns that were recovered last year in LA City only. And that's about a 400% increase over just about 3 years ago. So working with the chief of police in LAPD as well as county chief, we address the payment providers or the payment processors, MasterCard, Visa, and American Express, who, by the way, process about 90% of the sales of ghost guns on the internet. And we're asking them to stop processing the payments for this individual industries or this particular vendors. And we're in the middle of conversations in that area. And the goal here has been We know that legislatively, we have both cities and states that are creating more and more legal mechanisms, if you will, legislative ways of trying to reduce the flow of ghost guns, but we have not seen it abated. And I believe that we can actually go after the business model, and we may have a greater impact. We have seen car thefts go up, and we're seeing two things that are happening in the area of car theft, and it really is depending on what part of our county, and quite frankly, what part of the country. We see some cars that are just simply being stolen for basically transportation or joyriding. They're being recovered, within 2 or 3 days with no damage, nothing taken. Or when things are being taken from the vehicles, and this is especially impacting older models, primarily older hybrids, older Korean and Japanese cars. We have seen the catalytic converter theft. The catalytic converters are being removed, especially when it comes to hybrid. Because they have a cleaner combustion system. They're being resold, and we know that has driven a significant number of car thefts. We have worked with partners in the legislative branch as well as car manufacturers, and now we're coming with what we believe will have an impact on this, where catalytic converters will have to be stamped with either a serial number or a uniquely identifying marks upon the point of sale. And much like we did with cell phones years ago, which we created a kill switch for phones, something that I was involved in that as well. We believe that this will have an impact in this area. We continue to evaluate our work on a daily basis. We continue to look for better ways to improve the work that we're doing. I have been working with the Board of Supervisors, and you probably heard, or if you haven't, you will soon see that we are finally moving forward in creating an alternative to the Division of Juvenile Justice from the state for those kids that are involved in serious crimes. When Governor Newsom became governor, he announced that he was going to close DJJ. He gave counties roughly about 4 years to get this done. We're approaching that deadline in 2023. And LA County had not, we did a lot of studies. We determined where the right places to put these facilities, but we hadn't done so. And fortunately, unlike many other counties, we actually have the places, we have the money to do this. Finally, the Board of Supervisors moved forward yesterday in order to make this happen. We'll have the first facility, I think, that will be coming up for business in May, and the other ones will be coming up shortly thereafter. And this is an area that we need tremendous. We have a tremendous need for that in order to deal with those juveniles that are involved in more serious crimes. At the same time, we recognize that just simply warehousing these kids is not the right way to go about it. So these are centers that will be operating using a trauma-informed approach to mental health, and we all the science. And certainly the state mandates will take us to a place that I believe will continue to reduce the recidivism involving juveniles. At the same time, we've worked with the Board of Supervisors. One of the biggest criticisms that my office had when I took office, and there were a couple of polls that were made that showed that our work around victim services often was not trauma-informed, and often we were re-traumatizing many of the victims. We're working with the U.S. Department of Justice and other partners to create more of a victim-centered approach. One of the first things that I did when I became the district attorney was create a community advisory board that is composed of men and women themselves had either been victims of violent crime or have family members that have been the victims of violent crimes. They have helped us create policies around how we deal with victims. We were able to, given the budgetary capacity, to hire another 20 victims, a little over 20 victim services representatives. We're in the process of doing so. And additionally, we were provided the Board of Supervisors gave me the ability to hire a trauma-informed social worker / psychologist to head this unit. We're in the transition of moving away from having an attorney running that unit to someone, and actually we've made a selection, which we'll be announcing soon, someone that has been working in the public health field in mental health for many, many years, and she brings a tremendous amount of experience. And we believe that dealing with trauma when we're dealing with our victims is critical to our success. Almost invariably, every person that is engaged in criminal activity and harming someone has a history of having been victimized, often multiple times. In fact, if you look at women in incarceration, over 85% of them were the victims of sexual assault and violence. Men, similarly, very, very high numbers. We know that people that are hurt other people. So we want to make sure that when we have an opportunity to intervene, when someone has been made the victim of crime, not only that we deal with the prosecutorial side of it, but we're also dealing with repairing the harm, healing that person, and hopefully taking them into a better place. We also know that there are many people that, unfortunately, for a variety of reasons, do not qualify under the state's victims' compensation structure, and often, while they're being victimized, they have not been able to get the services that they need. Again, working with the board of supervisors, we're identifying funds that we can use to provide a trauma-informed intervention for those people that do not qualify under the state rules. I could go on, but frankly, I know that many of you have many questions. I saw some of them, but I'd rather directly deal with those questions as you ask them. So I'm going to stop now and entertain any questions you may have.
Well, that's impressive. A politician actually stopping to follow the rules. I love it. Great. Well, Jackie is going to, and she has the list of the questions that were sent earlier. So Jackie, go ahead and lead the way.
Well, I thought that I would start right off with, last month we met with Sheriff Villanueva, and he mentioned that you have not prosecuted, and he said 12,000 arrests were not being pursued, which comprised DUI, drugs, petty theft. Do you want to answer what that means? I mean, is that an accurate figure? And what is your take on that?
Well, look, I'm not going to answer directly to the sheriff because I think I'm better just simply dealing with the issues that we deal with. When it comes to the UIs, we're prosecuting the UIs at the same rates that we always have. As I mentioned before, we actually, in some areas of misdemeanor prosecutions, we have continued the same rate. When it comes to things like mental health related issues where no violence or no other component is involved, or substance abuse, we are diverting those cases. We're also, as I mentioned before, when it comes to things like driving without a license, rather than clog the courts, especially very limited amount of space that we have on our courts now. We have a tremendous backlog of felony cases because of COVID. We have moved to infract those cases. In other words, we're telling police to take those to the infraction process into traffic court, which we believe, and all the data and the evidence shows that the impact on traffic courts is as equal as that of a misdemeanor prosecution in these areas where people driving without a license. So yes, it has been a drop in some areas, not in the UIs, but certainly in areas where it has to do with people that are intoxicated in public, people that have they're under the influence of drugs, but they're being diverted into public health approach. And by the way, and I failed to say that on my opening statement, I'm also working with County Board of Supervisors to sort of centralize the services and be able to provide more diversion opportunities. Interestingly enough, in my nearly 40 years in the business, this is probably the first time in my life where I see plenty of money to deal with these issues. But the problem that we're suffering in LA County is often one of execution or implementation. We have great ideas. We've created a lot of different opportunities through the Office of Diversion and Reentry, the Office to Alternative to Incarceration. But what we lack is a consolidated approach to this work. And the Board of Supervisors recognize that, and increasingly they're moving forward. There was a resolution that was passed 3 weeks ago, I believe, that by early summer, we'll have a single umbrella where all the services will be placed so that we can take inventory and we can make sure that people are diverted where they need to be. It's very frustrating for prosecutors who are dealing with people that have severe mental health issues or substance abuse, and they often don't have any place to send them other than to send them to jail And they know, and we all know that that is not going to resolve the problem. But unfortunately, often they have no other solution because we have a lack of cohesion. So we're moving forward in order for that to occur.
Great, thank you. There's maybe some of these are perceptions, maybe, but they are what people did ask. The removal of gang filings. How is that? First of all, why was that something that was important to remove the gang filings? Has it hurt gang enforcement and deterrence for gangs?
Yeah, and I want to, I'm glad that you asked that question, Jackie, or whoever did. We have not stopped prosecuting gangs or people that are affiliated with gangs. What we have done is we've reduced the use of gang enhancements. And for those of you that may not understand, a person may commit a crime, let's say a murder or a robbery. And there may be evidence sometimes that the person, in addition to having committed the robbery or the murder or whatever other crime they committed, that they did so and they were also a member of a gang. And you could add a gang enhancement, you can significantly increase the time that someone would be incarcerated. People are being prosecuted for those cases. If you commit murder, if you commit robbery, you're facing prosecutions for the base offense. What we have refrained from doing is using the enhancements. And the reason for that is multifold. Number one, in fact, we're just in the middle of prosecuting LAPD officers for falsifying gang cards. We saw it was a fairly painful experience for the LAPD about a little over a year ago, where a group of officers from the Metropolitan Division were classifying or labeling young people as gang members when they were not. Under my predecessor, she filed many of these cases. We had recently a case where the judge actually dismissed the case that was filed by my predecessor. And while we somewhat disagree with the judge's view of the case, it became apparent that there's a lot of confusion in this area. So the judge basically, after hearing testimony from police defense, came to the conclusion that LA police officers did not understand what self-identification to gang membership was, which quite frankly was shocking to me. I actually agree with Ms. Lacey when she filed the case. I believe that the cases should have been filed. Nevertheless, we still have more cases that are coming from that scenario that we're working on. But we're also working with the police to make sure that they train their officers so there's a clear understanding of what self-identification as a gang member is. I think for most of us that would be quite surprising that a police officer would not know when somebody, how to tell when somebody says, yes, I am a gang member, or no, I'm not. But the judge found out that was not very clear in the LAPD training, so we're dealing with this. But I say all this to say there now the Attorney General and many others have come out in indicating that a large quantity of the people that are currently in the gang files in the state have been put there either fraudulently or perhaps by mistake by the officers. And we need to make sure that what we're doing is defendable and solid. So people that are members of gangs are being prosecuted. Generally, gang enhancements are not used unless we're fairly certain that they need to be used in a particular case, and we're very convinced. But by and large, the use of gang enhancements has been used in a way that has been tremendously discriminatory, and it hasn't necessarily enhanced public safety. And again, I want to underline, people are being held accountable. They're going to jail and prison when they commit the offenses. It's just simply the enhancement that may add additional years to a particular conviction are generally not being used.
There's been a lot of headlines about the issue of juvenile crime and the inability, holding juveniles accountable, especially if they're violent. I think you've made some modifications, but how do you keep them from victimizing? If they're not punished, how do you keep them from victimizing?
Yeah, this is where, I'm so glad that the Board of Supervisors actually yesterday finally, moved forward with the identification of sites to replace the DJJ, or the Division of Juvenile Justice, because one of the problems that we have right now for kids that are committing serious and violent cases, the state is no longer taking them because they will have to release him by 2023, which is obviously not enough time for any kind of intervention, given that we're almost a quarter away into 2022. On the other hand, the facilities that we currently have are either not equipped to handle kids that have committed very violent offenses, or they're being warehoused into cells without any treatment and intervention. So that has created a vacuum in services. And I believe that now with the new direction of the county is having, we'll be able to have the ability to handle this. Now, it's not that, by the way, that they're not being held accountable. They're being held accountable. The question becomes one of what is the right level of intervention? We know that especially for those under 25 and certainly under 18, all the science points out to the fact that a youthful mind is very easily reprogrammable with the right level of service. Unlike, once we're an adult, we're much more set in our ways. It may take longer, perhaps never. We could be rehabilitated completely, but for very young people, it's very easy to rewire them with the right level of services. So they are being held accountable. They're, certainly those that are committing serious crimes are being attended to. The county lacked the services that we needed. We know those are coming on board. Now, I know there was also another part, and I made a modification, and quite frankly, that modification was based on listening to both people inside the office as well as outside the community, where sometimes it may be appropriate to explore the possibility of prosecuting a juvenile as an adult. I personally believe that by and large, it doesn't work well. We have seen the failures of that, but we recognize, and I recognize there may be exceptional cases where perhaps the only vehicle might be in a particular case would be to prosecute a young person as an adult. And for that, we have created a committee of very experienced people in the office that will review any requests that come from line attorneys in the case that they believe that someone should be considered for adult prosecution. This will be very minimal. One of the things that I want to make sure is that we're extremely understanding this would have to be truly exceptional cases where there are no other alternatives. But nevertheless, that was a reaction. I heard the concerns that came from many quarters, in some cases even criticism, and we're trying to address that at the same time. And now by the county ramping up the equivalent of BJJ, we believe that we're heading into a much better place.
So while we follow the headlines, gangs, youth, there's also a question I received, which is that it says you directed the deputy DAs, I don't know if that's true, to not prosecute quality of life crimes like trespass, prostitution, public intoxication. What is your stance on that?
Yeah, so it's not that I directed not to prosecute. What we have directed is these cases by and large. And again, we created actually exceptions for this last summer, is to divert those cases into working with the Alternatives to Incarceration Office of the county, because we know that generally we get a much better result when we do that. Nevertheless, we created the possibility, and we communicated that to all of our law enforcement partners, that when you have people that are continuously reoffending and they haven't reacted to the diversion, then we will consider prosecution on a case by case. And this is an area that is really interesting because I think most members of the community do not understand. Actually, within your organization, there are many cities that have a city prosecutor. They're about half of the county. We have a little over 10 million people in our county. A little over 5 million people in the county are served by a city attorney for misdemeanor prosecutions. When we compared the outcomes that we're getting on the areas where we're prosecuting misdemeanors, the way that we're currently doing it, or diverting, comparing to those cities that may be still following the older approach, which, by the way, increasingly they're not. Most city attorneys are following very similar diversionary guidelines that we are. What we see is that our results are very similar. In fact, I often tell people, especially when it comes to houselessness and mental health on the streets, if locking these people up would bring a difference, and the city of LA, for instance, would not have the problems that it has. But it has the problems not because of the city attorney's fault, but because we know that just simply locking up a person for a few days when they're suffering mental health problems and substance abuse and houselessness doesn't cure the problem. All it does is takes them out of the cycle for a few days. They come back again and they reoffend. And given that the way that under COVID, the way that cases are side back, for those low-level misdemeanor arrests, the police may make an arrest and they citing someone. They're generally being cited for 4 or 5 months out. So they get released immediately pending the court case. They're continuing to reoffend during the entire period. That has nothing to do with the prosecutor, whether it's the DA or the city attorney. The side back periods are set by the courts, just like bail or no bail are set by the courts. And when somebody gets arrested, the police follows the bail schedule set by the courts and the side back dates. So we often see people committing even more serious misdemeanors, like, smash and grabs, not the felony type, not the robberies and all that, but sometimes people are being cited, 5 months out. In fact, when we had, and this are not misdemeanors actually, these were felonies, but when people did the robberies during Thanksgiving, the smash and grabs in some of the major department stores, and there was a number of arrests that were made. These were felonies. They posted bail or they were released under the emergency bail schedule. They were all cited back for late March. Actually, those November arrests, we will not see anybody in court until late March. We know that some of those people have continued to reoffend and they have picked up additional cases. One of the things that we're doing in this area is we're working with the police department. We started with the LAPD, trying to work with them to, when they have a repeat offender, to actually call us and come to us so that we can work on bail deviation so they don't get released. And we're also asking the courts to reduce the side back time from the 5 months or so to a shorter period of time, because we know that one of the things that our work can do is, if we have certainty about the outcome, we're more likely to have an impact than when there is no certainty. When you cite somebody 5 months out, the certainty is not there, especially when most people never get arrested in the first place.
Your success factors, how do you, I guess you use data, but how long with you in the job should we look for success factors, and what are you charging yourself with?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, there are many things, right? I mean, for one thing, for instance, last year we said we would put more emphasis in violent crime and in serious crimes, and we have seen an increase in our filings. And sexual assaults especially was an area that we have really low rates of filing. We have almost double those. That's an area that I consider a success. I also wanted to create a great deal of transparency, and actually by the end of this month, at the latest, the very first, early April, we're going to have public dashboards where you all will be able to go in at any time and see in real time what our charge rates are by crime, by area of the county. And this is something that I think will be a major success, because it creates a level of transparency that we have never seen in the county. Working with the Board of Supervisors to get the alternative to DJJ going, which is now moving forward, I think that will be a success. I think that we're also seeing success in how we begin the process of bringing a public health approach to violence. This is an area, by the way, that I don't take credit for it. I think a lot of data will tell you that district attorneys should never take credit for crime reductions, but they should never be blamed for crime increases either. And that is supported by data. But what I do take credit for, as we're seeing some reductions in violence now starting to show up, especially in the area of homicides in the city of LA and hopefully throughout the county, is the cooperation that we're bringing public health to our work, which I believe that increasingly will create better outcomes and better interventions moving forward.
Before I forget, when you get those dashboards done, I hope your staff will let me know and we can put them in our publications. And
absolutely, and you can, like I said, we're looking at 2 weeks or so, they should be up. So I'll make sure that you get notified.
Great. So I know we probably have other questions although nobody's put one in the chat, but let me just ask you these two. What can cities do to help reduce crime, and what can cities do to help victims of crime? How do we help you?
Yeah, I think there are many things. I think that doing what we're doing right now is really important. I think it's very helpful. In fact, now that, again, we have been through this unusual time where we have to meet this way. Tomorrow, for instance, I'm hosting for the first time in my office a group of city elected officials from the San Gabriel Valley area, and we're going to start doing that throughout the county. I think that having those direct communications are really helpful. We're working a great deal with some of your police departments in order to address specific issues that are impacting your communities. For instance, we met with the chief of police of Redondo Beach recently. We're meeting, some of my staff has been meeting with many. We've met with the Lomita Sheriff's Office before. So I think that where the cities can be really helpful is really engaging, so that we can work together to address the uniqueness of your own piece of real estate. We know that this is a huge county. It's larger than, I believe it's 32 or 33 states, right? What works in the Antelope Valley, it's not necessarily going to work in Redondo Beach or Santa Monica or some other community. So part of the challenge for my office is how do we tailor our approaches within a basic rubric, but to address the needs of particular communities. And that is best done when we're working together. We're identifying the issues that are particular to your community and trying to address that. I think the other thing that I think cities can do, in addition to obviously, all of us working together, I think that often it's really important to, depending on the needs of your community, sort of take an assessment back of what other partners can we bring to the table. I think that many of the members of this organization don't necessarily suffer from the great optics and violence, right? And we have seen the numbers, so I can say that with a high level of certainty, but certainly you're being impacted by low-level theft offenses and some of the quality of life issues. And for instance, Supervisor Yanis Hunt, which covers many of your areas, has been pushing really hard to create drug courts around the county, and specifically in her district, which we support. And I think that the more the cities engage in this process so that we can start creating these drug courts, I think that will have an impact again, because it's an area where we can funnel people into services when other tools have not worked. But I would say overall, I think doing what we're doing right now, hopefully doing it more in person, continuing the dialogue is really, in my opinion, is a key to improvement and quite frankly, a better community for all of us.
Great. I'll ask another question. I don't see any more questions. So LA County is obviously very complex. The criminal justice system is much, much more complex than that. What are the barriers that you see? What are the obstacles that you have to jump through to get your job done?
I think that sort of the short-term barriers have been, we were in a hiring freeze for almost 2 years. I came into an office where we lost, almost 20% of our attorneys. We lost a lot of people in the last, coming in and not being able to hire people. And I'm going back all the way to 2020. Even, when I came in the office, we were already substantially down because of retirements and people leaving. We were in a hiring freeze. We've gotten out of that. I was able to get support by the Board of Supervisors to hire more people. We have promoted now over 100 deputies, as well as other areas. We hire now 20 victim services. Our victim services unit was way down. So those are sort of unique challenges to the moment. I think that, frankly, the lack of capacity to have, face-to-face contact with a lot of the members of our staff, as well as other partners in the system, created a vacuum. As I mentioned earlier, I visit every branch and office around our county, and I will walk into an office, and sometimes, I'm saying 50%, sometimes not even 50% of the people were there, right? So that human touch, which is so critical in general, but especially in the early stages of a leadership team, unprecedented, right, for about a year or so. So those are the things that we're working through. I think that the more systemic challenges that we all have is, we are very spread out. We're very, very diverse. It's even your organization is. Being able to take such a large structure and be able to tailor make our approach and still keep some level of unity within the larger county family becomes sometimes a challenge. On the one hand, the good thing is that because we are big, we can move a lot of resources around in ways that no one else in the country can, right? I mean, we have the capacity to move mountains sometimes. The downside of that capacity too is that sometimes, because we are so big, sometimes we become extremely impersonal, and we lose the human touch. And that, I think, is something that I have to make sure that I account for that, to make sure that what we can, we bridge those gaps.
How severe is I guess the courts have tremendous backlog. How does that affect your work? I mean, you mentioned it already with the 5 months, but are there other impacts to that?
Tremendously, we're literally thousands of cases behind, and I'm talking about serious violent cases, right? And we are at a collision course. The courts were going to open up in January. We had to shut down again because of Omicron. We're now getting on track to open it up. But, the result of this, frankly, is that the courts, and I cannot blame the courts, but it's going to make a lot of us unhappy. They're creating, basically a system of very quick resolutions of all cases, because we're going to have to move on. What that means is that you get into a factory, almost an assembly line approach, where often the uniqueness of a particular case or a particular victim situation, quite frankly, may be sacrificed in order of expediency of moving these cases, and that's just going to take a while to deal with this. The numbers are staggering. They're, depending on whose numbers you count, it could be 17,000 felony cases, right? That are aging and they need to be forward. And at the same time, we continue to have, the regular workload, right? So it's going to be a very rough ride for the system for a while. And by the way, it's not only my office that, is the courts, right? They don't have enough courtrooms. It's also, the police. Many of the police departments are severely understaffed. You have public defenders, you have probation, so every part of the system will be impacted by this process, and it's taking a great deal of nuance and fine-tuning to be able to get out of this, and it's going to take us probably a good year or so to get out of this. It took us 2 years to get here. It's going to take a good year or so to clear this up, but some of the outcomes are going to be less than satisfactory.
Councilman Uphoff from Lomita, you have 2 questions in the chat. Do you want to ask them, or I can ask them, whichever?
Yeah, go ahead, Jack. Well, actually, I'll ask him. Appreciate your time today, District Attorney. What's the general, I have 2 questions. What's the general morale of the LADA's office with the changes you've initiated? And then the second question was, what's your opinion on proposed changes to Prop 47? Thank you, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I would say that it's mixed when it comes to morale, right? I think that we are going through an unprecedented period of time where people were working from home for a long period of time. Now they're being asked to come back. And, while we're trying to maintain a hybrid approach to the workplace, because I believe that actually moving forward, hybrid approach to work is important for our employees, that's causing a problem. We're also transforming a system. People that come into this job, whether you're a public defender or you're a prosecutor, it's very ideologically driven. We come in with a very clear compass of what we think it should happen. And certainly for people that came into this job around the time that I did them for the last 20, 30 years, the currency of our work was high levels of arrest, high levels of prosecution, high levels of incarceration. That has created a backslash that has created a tremendous economic impact that is not sustainable. It has created a huge social impact that is also not sustainable, and has increasingly created a lack of legitimacy for the entire system in many communities. And I think it's actually put police and prosecutors often at odds with communities that we need to be working with. However, because many of the people that are in my office came under that just like I did, by the way, I had many of the conversations that I have today, 10, 15, 20 years ago, I would have a very different conversation. I saw the job differently. It was really my own evolution, visiting places like Germany, visiting other parts of the world where they do the work very, very differently and have tremendous difference, very different results. And that is guiding the work. But I think it's certainly, when you're transforming a system, there is always going to be friction. I think that the second part of your question having to deal with Prop 47. And by the way, I know that we had questions about crime numbers in Lomita, so I have yours. I know that we gave them to you, and I'm looking at your crime numbers. And interestingly enough, in 2021, you guys are pretty much. I mean, some things are down, some things are slightly up, but basically, if you do a 5-year average, your city is within the 5-year average, in some cases a little less, some cases a little more. So I was glad to see that. But the issue of Prop 47, I share with you guys what I found to be probably one of the best written opinion pieces that I've seen around. It was done by the LA Times. I urge you to take a look at it, because I think that the LA Times, they did a lot of research. They took a lot of time to really address this in ways that I think most academics have shown that Prop 47 hasn't caused a crime increase, but have taken hundreds of pages to say so. The LA Times did it in about 600 words. I urge you to take a look at it. And if you have any questions after that, I would love to re-engage you.
Good, thank you, sir.
Our homeless manager, senior manager, Ronson Shu, has a question for you. Ronson, do you want to ask a question?
Thank you, District Attorney. I used to work for the LA City Attorney's Office in the Community Justice Program, and we were very proud of our community justice panels to divert misdemeanor crimes. And I heard it might have been on your campaign site or your office site, but it sounded like you were looking into those community panel programs and maybe adopting them for county misdemeanor diversions.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Actually, Ron, I don't know how long ago you were with the city attorney, but actually, if you were there for a very long time, it was actually Rocky Delgadillo that started the neighborhood prosecutors many years ago, and that spin off into many other work, including the community hearing officers, which I think is a wonderful model. It's a model that we're trying to find ways to emulate. We began by deploying 4 prosecutors to 4 LAPD stations. Our goal is to continue to do this around the county. Now, the ones that we deploy in the LA PD stations were not necessarily only on misdemeanors. In fact, it's not misdemeanors, because you will know in the city of LA, the city attorney does a misdemeanor. So we were looking at dealing with more serious crimes. But I think that especially when it comes to issues of mental health and quality of life, I think that the programs that the LA City Attorney, through both the neighborhood prosecutors and the hearing officers had, was very successful. As like anything else, I think that there's tremendous lack of resources, and this program need to be really, I believe they need to be increased.
Thank you all. I'm going to turn this back over to John Cruikshank, who can say the last couple of words, and thank you, the District Attorney.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie. And a special thanks to our District Attorney, George Gascón, for joining us tonight. I think it's great that we can have a civilized discussion, ask some good questions, and hear all about what's going on at our District Attorney's office. And of course, I want to thank his staff as well, Tiffany Blacknell and also George Rodriguez, for joining us and putting the good information into the chat while we were talking. That was actually good. We're all getting very proficient in Zoom, and I think having the links there to have us get right to information is great. And George also shared his contact information if you didn't happen to capture that while the talk was going. So with that,
John,
yes, sir.
I just want to say that, and I'm sorry for interrupting. I first of all, I want to thank you and the group, but I also want to extend an invitation. I hope that we can do this in person soon, have you guys come over to the office. And obviously, I look forward to a continuing dialogue.
Oh, that's terrific. And I'm sure all of our cities would welcome you and your staff to any of our council meetings to come speak with us. And we very much appreciate that offer. And I'm sure Jackie will make that happen if she can. So anyhow, on behalf of the South Bay City Council of Government, I want to thank everyone for being with us today. I thought it was a very thoughtful and informative event. And of course, to the supervisor or the DA, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And for everyone, have a good night. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.